Hi, everybody, and welcome to this event. We're delighted that so many of you can join us. For those of you who don't know me, I've not met. Unfortunately, this is on Zoom, but my name is Richard Gilbertson, and I chair the NHS Innovation Committee External Advisory Board for this exciting opportunity that is put forward by the NHS Cancer Programme. As you know, you're joining us today because we're excited to to launch Competition 2, looking for mature innovations to bring forward for implementation into the NHS. The idea here, of course, is for us to achieve the long-term plan for cancer, 55,000 more lives saved, and of course, 3/4 of individuals diagnosed at early stage from cancer, which we believe will be a step change in how we manage cancer in this country. If we could have the first slide, it will take us through the agenda. So just to give you an overview of what we'll be going through today, I'm delighted to introduce in a moment Gillian Rosenberg and also Katrina Lombardo. They'll be talking to us about the NHS Cancer Programme. Also, we'll be joined by Peter Johnson, and we hope on time. Peter's very busy, but he'll be joining us. And we'll then have a Q&A question. And because Peter's time is short and many of you will have not had the opportunity to talk to Peter, we'll really encourage you to put forward questions in that Q&A session. It's a great opportunity for you to ask questions directly of the programme membership, but also any clinical questions to Peter particularly. There will be other Q&A sessions, one at the end, and then you will hear of another opportunity that we'll be putting forward for you to dialogue directly with the programme. You'll be able to contact the programme at any time, but we would encourage you to join those specific sessions both today and those that will be organised. So without further ado, with the next slide, I'd like to introduce, go to the next slide, please, Gillian Rosenberg, who's Innovation Transformation Lead for the NHS Cancer Programme. And I'm delighted, Gillian's going to take us through some aspects of this initiative with you. Gillian.
Thank you, Richard, and also thanks to all of you for attending this briefing webinar for our second annual open call for cancer innovations. As Richard said, I'm Gillian Rosenberg, and I head up the innovation workstream within the National Cancer Programme. And before we go into the details of the call itself, I want to provide you with some context for how this fits in with our wider innovation programme. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So our current focus is to enable the implementation of prioritised innovations that will support our long-term plan objectives, and specifically the early diagnosis objective. Because we know that if we want to diagnose 75% of cancers by stage 1 and stage 2 by 2028, then we can't just implement interventions that we currently know work. We have to make sure we're bringing new innovations in through the NHS. And so we plan to do this in a number of ways: identifying and prioritising innovations, funding national real-world pilots with robust evaluations so we can speed up the pathway to implementation, supporting smaller local innovations to gather evidence for that wider, larger scale rollout. But we also want to do more than just provide funding. We want to make use of our experience and expertise in the cancer landscape and delivery of NHS services to give these innovations the best chance of success. So how are we going to do this? So if we go on to the next slide, you can see a summary of our programmes, and the one highlighted at the top is, of course, the reason we're here today. Our series of annual innovation open call competitions is an important way that we can identify and support the most promising innovations that will help us to deliver on our ambitions. And those successful innovations will be tested and evaluated in real-world settings so that those that make the biggest difference can be rapidly implemented across the NHS. So we ran the first round of this last year and have successfully funded 8 cancer diagnosis innovations, and are very excited to be launching the second round now. The competition is being led by the NHS Cancer Programme, and we have commissioned LGC to carry out the PMO functions, including managing the applications and the assessment process. And just for context, this sits alongside the other programmes that we have within the team, which include implementation pilots of 2 innovations nationally that have been identified through a proactive horizon scanning exercise, Cytosponge and Grail, and also providing that local innovation funding via our cancer alliances. If we go on to the next slide, As I mentioned earlier, we want to do more than just give money to innovations. We really want to give them the best chance of success. So this is an example of some of the support we will be providing to our funded innovations. For example, including advice on implementation and overcoming barriers, understanding the patient pathway and the impact of the innovations. We want to help create and provide the links with key stakeholders and other programs across the NHS who will be impacted by or have an impact on the innovation projects, and also support long-term strategies for implementation for the successful projects. So that was just a bit of a brief overview of the cancer programme and where this open call competition sits. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Katerina from the PMO team, who's going to talk through more of the specific details of the call.
Sorry, I realized I was on mute, so thanks, Gillian. And if we can go to the next slide, please, I would like to dive straight into the focus of this current call. We are looking at innovations that can allow patients to be diagnosed with cancer at an earlier stage. So there is a strong early detection and diagnosis of cancer focus for this call. Professor Peter Johnson will cover details and insights of the ambition of this challenge. But if we can go to the next slide, please. I would like to describe what we mean in terms of innovation types that we're looking for. So in terms of innovation, we are looking at the broader sense of this term. So we welcome applications from, of course, medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, but also behavioral interventions or models of care. So basically, anything that isn't a drug or a therapeutic is welcome to apply for this competition. Instead, something that is not eligible for this call are specific tools focused on improving the efficiencies of diagnostic services. This can be a clear side outcome of your diagnostic tool, but shouldn't be the focus of the call. In terms of the stage of development of the innovations we're looking for mature innovations here. So we really would like for innovations to come forward if they are already available on the market. If this applies to you, you should already have achieved regulatory approvals or be at least in use in standard of care in one trust. This is not a competition for early stage innovations. And in terms of the organizations that can apply for this call, any size is welcome to apply, any type of organization, as long as you're based in the UK or the EU. However, considering that this is an NHS England call, the test sites will have to be based in England. If you have an exciting innovation and your organization is based outside of these regions, you can still apply, but you can't be the lead applicant on the application. You will have to partner up with an organization that is based in these areas. So innovations from everywhere around the world really can be welcome to contribute to this call. And in terms of the project types we are looking for, really the aim here is to develop evidence for mature innovations to enter the NHS. So we're looking at real-world implementation studies. There is not, at the moment, at least in particular for this call, we are not looking into developing efficacy or effectiveness or developing new products. You should have already done that before you apply. And in terms of the duration and the budget for this call, you can apply for projects of up to 18 months and up to 4 million net. Next slide, please. My colleague Z will provide more details about the assessment process, but I wanted just to flag a few things. It's going to be quite thorough. So when you apply, there will be several stages of assessment. Firstly, all the applications will be reviewed by a panel of experts with complementary expertise. There will be an analysis of the impact on services that your innovation would have. So please be specific when you include the details about your innovation. And if you are shortlisted to the next step, you will be peer-reviewed by other experts. There will be further analysis done in terms of the impact and cost analysis, and you will be invited to present in front of a panel of experts. If you're deemed eligible for funding, there will be a due diligence process before you can sign the contract. Next slide, please. I've already discussed the fact that we are looking at mature innovations, but I wanted to spend some time to focus on what sort of projects we're expecting to receive. So as I mentioned, we are looking to see real-world implementation studies described in the applications. So work packages we expect to see will be related to, for example, training of staff to administer the innovation, health economics, patient and public involvement. Some minor adaptations of the innovation can also be included, but that shouldn't be a big part of the project. Instead, something that we will ask all the applicants to provide is a plan for an independent evaluation of outcomes. And this is because we expect the exit point for this program and for these projects to be quite tangible and to bring you closer to the NHS. So we would like at the end of the project for you to be ready to either go on to procurement frameworks, to have developed the evidence for NICE approval, or other similar opportunities. Next, please. This is quite a busy slide. I'm not gonna cover all the details, but what I wanted to flag is that compared to other programs, we do fund 100% of SME costs. However, I encourage everyone to budget their project based on a fair market value costing, because your project will be assessed also in terms of the value for money in comparison with the other proposals that we receive. And in terms of the contracting, the SBRI contracts are pre-procurement contracts. So they might incur VAT if this applies to you. We do contract single organizations, single legal entities actually, and the main terms and conditions of the programs of the contract are not negotiable. And then once you become part of our portfolio, there is a number of opportunities that are unlocked to you. As Gillian mentioned, there will be support from the NHS Cancer Programme team. Also, as a side of the PMO, there will be events organized, opportunities for you to learn, and also we'll give you the opportunity to undertake a NICE meta tool analysis. Next slide, please. Just a few key dates as a reminder. Application deadline is sharp at 1 p.m. on the 24th of May, and panels will be hosted in September. We will publish the dates shortly. Next slide, please. So this is the second call that we launched as part of the NHS Cancer Programme. Just a few weeks ago, we were able to announce the outcome of the first pilot call that we launched last year, and we were pleased to support 8 innovations. These innovations and the projects will include sites all across England. There are 12 cancer alliances involved, 8 AHSNs supporting, and most importantly, there will be more than 30,000 patients that will be part of the real-world implementation studies. Next slide, please. Talking about key partners, in a few minutes, you will also hear presentations from AHSNs and cancer alliances that have supported the innovators in the first cohort, and you will understand how they can play a key role in your project. Due to the nature of the things we're going to fund in these competitions, we expect them to be a key part of your project. Next slide, please. For this reason, we are hosting a matchmaking event, virtual, on the 24th of March. So if you're considering applying for this call, you think you have the right innovation, but you need to establish stronger contacts with cancer alliances and AHSNs, consider putting forward your expression of interest for the event. And also conscious of the fact that we are providing you with a lot of information today. Probably there is a lot to digest, so we will host further Q&A sessions in April for you to ask further questions to us. And I think that with this concludes my presentation. Probably there is one more slide about how to reach out to us if you need to. Please do contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Katrina. I hope Peter Johnson has joined us. Is Peter with us now?
I'm indeed, Richard, yeah.
Hey, Peter, great to welcome you. So I'm sure everyone is aware that Peter is the National Clinical Director for Cancer, and he's going to overview some major challenges that we're hoping to meet with this innovation call. Just to remind you, just to put your questions in the Q&A box. We've got some coming in already, but Peter, welcome, and we're looking forward to what you've got to say.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard, and welcome everybody to the call. There should be a slide coming up somewhere. We go on to the next one, if I may. So this really is to give you the context of what this innovation call is all about and what the overarching ambitions of the NHS England Cancer Programme are all about. And some of this, I suspect, may be familiar territory, but perhaps not to everybody. So the NHS Cancer Programme is splittable down into the 5 domains of work set out on the slide here: our screening program, diagnostic tests, and particularly rapid access, the effectiveness of treatment, and the personalization of follow-up. But the bottom panel is the one that we're particularly focused on today, which is that we recognize that in order to achieve our ambitions in the long-term plan, which I'll come on to shortly, we are not going to be able to do this purely as the NHS on its own. We rely on the expertise, enthusiasm, and ability to innovate of a variety of partners, both academic and industrial. And it's very specifically in order to try and draw in those people who have ideas which are ready to go and ready for implementation and testing in the real world setting that we're particularly running this competition. So the collaboration of academia, the NHS and industry is absolutely the core business. And furthermore, speaking to the ambitions that we have set out for the NHS Cancer Plan are critical to that. Can I have the next slide, please? So these are our headline ambitions, the main headline being that we wish to prevent 55,000 cancer deaths per year in order to see people surviving 5 years or more. And in order to do that, the principal determinant of that success is going to be our ability to diagnose cancer at an earlier stage when it's most amenable to curative treatment. And in order to do that, we've set ourselves the ambition of 75% of cancers being diagnosed at an early stage, and that compares to a level of around 55% before the pandemic. And you can imagine that the last 2 years have done nothing really to help us on our way with the pressure that the NHS has been under and people's understandable reluctance to present. So we have quite a big hill to climb. And in order to close that 20-odd percentage point gap between where we are currently and where we need to be in 5 or 6 years' time, we need to harness all the different ideas that we can to make sure that we can pick up cases at the earliest possible stage and investigate them as efficiently as possible. And it's for that reason that we're running these competitions. And as you've already heard, the first open call has already worked through, and we have 8 different organizations doing a variety of different things, using data science and commonly used blood tests and AI algorithms to sift out and to try and increase the efficiency with which we find people in the community who might need urgent referral, different clinical pathways to triage workflows, to pick up head and neck cancer more rapidly, using whole body MRI to look for early cancer, using X-ray analysis using AI in order to streamline the workload in chest X-rays, an assay to look for Lynch syndrome, for microsatellite instability, developed at Newcastle hospitals in order to try and help us to identify those families who have a hereditary predisposition to bowel cancer and to identify those cases, liquid biopsies for the faster diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So a slew of different innovations which we will see how they deliver in the next couple of years, but we are really looking for the next wave of innovation to help us to do that. Can I have the next slide, please? So to set out the kind of context of what we're trying to do, this graph shows you along the horizontal axis the proportion of each particular type of cancer that's listed there, which is diagnosed at a particular stage. And you can see that at the right-hand end there, breast cancer, melanoma, thyroid and testicular cancer are diagnosed in a very high proportion of cases at stage 1 or 2, whereas down on the left-hand side there, things like lung cancer, esophageal cancer and pancreatic cancer are much more commonly diagnosed at an advanced stage. And the vertical axis is the incidence, the number of cases per year that we see of each of these cancers. And you can see that there are some big areas like lung cancer and colorectal where we're well below the average in terms of the proportion presenting at an early stage, but there's also down in the bottom left of this diagram a whole lot of other cancer types where diagnosing at an early stage remains a problem. And even though the absolute numbers are not as high, in aggregate, those make up a very large number of cases. So this is not just about prostate and colorectal and lung cancer. This is about every potential type of cancer. And we would like to see innovations in any or all of these areas to see how we can shift the dots on this diagram to the right so that we progressively increase the proportion of all of these cancers which we pick up at an early stage. Next slide, please. In looking at how we run the system as it currently functions, this graph shows you the number of so-called 2-week wait referrals, the urgent suspected cancer referrals that we've seen year on year starting in 2009. And what you can see is from the blue line that we increased between 2009 and 2019 the number of people that were referred into the system in England from a little under 1 million to just about 2.5 million over the course of that decade. So we had a progressively rising number of people referred for investigation. And you can also see on the right-hand end that dropped rather sharply during the first year of the pandemic, although I'm glad to say that referrals are now back up to not only normal levels, but around about 110% of what we were seeing pre-pandemic. So this has bounced back very substantially. But the important point about this is the bottom line that you can see here, the orange line, which is the number of people whose cancer is diagnosed through this route. So this is not all of cancer, this is only the people referred on the 2-week wait system, which constitutes around 45% of total cancer diagnoses. And you can see that this is going up at a much less steep angle. So we went from just under 98,000 to just under 150,000 over the same period. So we were seeing a lot more people in order to diagnose a few more cancers. And what we would obviously like to do is improve the efficiency of this process as far as we possibly can to make sure that we are putting people through as little pain and anxiety and disturbance as we can in order to continue to maintain our ability to diagnose cancer at an early stage. So the divergence of those lines is, if you like, the big challenge before us. And we would like to think about what we can do to make sure that we diagnose increasing numbers of cancers through this kind of route with the same sort of level of rise that we see in the numbers of referrals. Last slide, please. So we have done a huge amount as we've come out of the pandemic to reassure people that the NHS is here, that we do want to see people with suspicious symptoms, whether it's a lump, whether it's unexplained pain or bleeding or other symptoms. We are working very hard to make sure that the demand on the system is still there. And as I say, the referrals over the last 6 months have been running at record historical levels. So I think we are succeeding to an extent, and we will continue our efforts in this area to bring people in, to have people coming forward for investigation and diagnosis. What we need you to help us do is to find out the best and most efficient ways to achieve that in order that we make the best possible use of the very substantial investment in diagnostics, which is going into the NHS. We're investing 2.3 billion extra over the next 5 years in the diagnostic system. And as everybody is also well aware, we have a very constrained workforce, which we're working hard to expand. But anything we can do to improve the efficiency and productivity, and any of the ideas that you've got to bring us that will work in that area, would be extremely welcome. So I will stop there and hand over to the next speaker.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. So actually we're now into our Q&A session. So Peter, if you can answer some of these, that'd be most helpful, along with both Gillian and Katrina. So thank you for those of you who've typed questions in the Q&A. Please continue to do those. We'll have another Q&A session at the end. But perhaps, Peter, I'll start with you. So there's one of the delegates asked this question. I won't go through all of the question, but particularly, is mass screening of interest to NHS England, because they refer to one of their innovations, which has the ability to potentially top line test up to 100,000 samples per day, potentially screening for prostate, ovarian, cervical cancer. So is that something of interest to NHS England?
Frankly, I think yes, case identification at a population level is an extremely interesting idea. People will be aware that we already have national screening programs in breast, cervical and colorectal cancer. Clearly, there are enormous hurdles to getting a national screening set up, but we're doing a lot in lung cancer. We're already using CT scanning to do our targeted lung health checks, which is being rolled out in a series of pilot sites. We'll be up to over 40 in the next year. And furthermore, we're working with commercial partners to look at blood-borne biomarkers for early diagnosis. Those are in trials rather than implementation phase. So I think it would need to be something which had a sufficient evidence base behind it to want to generate real-world evidence. But certainly, I think nothing in that respect would be off the table.
Thank you, Peter. Another question is, are we only focusing on innovations in secondary care? I think I know the answer to this, but it'd be great to hear from you. And how about the management and early detection of cancer patients in primary care?
No, absolutely. The primary care has to be one of our principal target audiences. If we're going to diagnose cancer earlier, we have to make it easier for colleagues in primary care to identify and refer on patients. So this is absolutely not about an exclusive focus on secondary care. This is very much about case finding in the community. And I should emphasize, one of the biggest deficiencies we see in referrals in cancer is among disadvantaged communities. So the more socioeconomically disadvantaged groups find it harder to get into the system. There's a difference in the levels of early presentation, which is very substantial between the highest levels of deprivation and the lowest. So anything that you're thinking about, if it could possibly be targetable in some way at more deprived communities who find it harder to access healthcare, that would absolutely be what the sort of thing we're looking for.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry, Peter, I'm bombarding you with questions, which is good. There's lots of clinical questions for you. So the next one is, are diagnostic technologies that improve diagnostic efficiency and thereby free up pathology resources or other diagnostic services relevant to this call?
I think anything which improves the efficiency of the diagnostic pathway is something that we would certainly consider. Again, pathology workforce and laboratory capacity is something on which we are significantly constrained. So if there were innovations which would streamline pathways, which would make it easier to process biopsy samples, would make it easier, for example, to get the results read across a digital pathology network, those sorts of things, absolutely, we would consider.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the other questions, perhaps more about the process itself. So this one I think Randa might want to answer, but anybody from the programme can answer, and that is there a forum for local innovations that are currently supported by the Cancer Alliances to be shared and assessed for implementation in other parts of the country?
So shall I just chip in on that?
Yes, please, Katrina, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think probably short answer, we haven't established anything as such yet, but it's part of some of the ambitions of activities we would like to develop as part of the program. But in general, if you want to start having a discussion with Cancer Alliances related to your project, you could start with the event that we're hosting on the 24th of March. If that sort of answers your question. It won't be a forum only to discuss the innovations that Cancer Alliances support, but it could be an opportunity to ask these questions because there will be representatives there.
Great, thank you. Next question, I think also for you, Katrina, but it could be Gillian or others from the centre might want to answer, and will technology that is wider from current screening be considered? So, for example, can we evaluate risk of colon cancer for population without FIT tests? This question comes from someone who says their technology is well validated outside of the UK.
So I can start with this, and then NHS colleagues, please chip in to add your view. In principle, yes. The only thing that we would suggest is that you really need to make a strong case of why, how much this would improve what is current standard of care and why that would be better. So I appreciate that would be a broader approach, but it's more a matter of making the case of how, this will really affect or be in line with things that are already out there for this. So how this would affect the current screening programs, I think this would be a good point to discuss in your application.
Great, thank you. Any comments from the NHS colleagues for that?
Yeah, oh, sorry, Gillian, carry on.
No, you go, Peter.
Nope, ladies first.
So, I mean, just to say, we are definitely interested in technologies that are in other parts of the world and how that might translate to the UK, and certainly a direct comparison with what we're doing at the moment would be something that would be of interest.
Okay. Did you want to add to that, Peter?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, great. Well, I do have a question for you, Peter, and this is getting into the nuance of, I guess, what people define as early detection, which is there's an innovation related to the early detection of progression to secondary, advanced or metastatic cancer among patients who've been diagnosed previously with early stage disease. Is that applicable?
This program is primarily about initial diagnosis, and the question of detection of recurrence is largely a whole different set of questions. So we're not looking at diagnostics to apply to people who already have a previous diagnosis of cancer. This is really about primary diagnostic pathways.
Great. And I think a related question, but to one earlier, but I think is important to clarify, and that is, are innovations in the pathology field that can triage biopsies likely to be cancerous, and they're also proven to reduce misdiagnosis of interest, so ensuring that cancer is not missed, improving the quality of diagnosis, etc.?
Yes, that sounds very much like the improvement of efficiency of diagnostic pathways in a pathology lab. So anything which could allow us to streamline analysis of samples and again potentially free up pathology time, I think would be considered within the scope, in very much analogous to the way that we've funded the AI program to analyze chest x-rays, which large part of which will not be about diagnosing cancer, but will free up time for cancer diagnostics.
Great, thank you. I do have to get this question out of the way because many people have asked it, and that is to the office. Will the slides be made available to those viewing this event after the session?
The answer is yes, of course, but we will welcome you to stay and take advantage of our experts to ask questions if you have the time today. But of course, yes, they will be available.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So another interesting question is an online cancer education platform specifically for GPs and other healthcare professionals of interest? I don't know, Katrina, if you would like to pick up that one.
Sorry, I'm having problems with my mute button today. I guess it depends if you can, and I would be happy for the NHS England and maybe Peter also to comment on this, but I guess it depends on how you can then demonstrate that this would have an impact on improving early diagnosis of cancer. So it depends on how you make the case for it. That's what we're looking into also in terms of the data that we'll be collecting through the application form. The use case will have to be for that.
Great, thank you. Would Gillian or Peter like to comment on that further?
This does feel like a bit of a stretch to me. Whilst anything which helps GPs to identify and refer on cancers more rapidly and with a higher level of precision is certainly something we would be looking at. A generic online education tool is probably one step out of where we would anticipate going.
Great, thank you. Another interesting question, which we're very interested in academia particularly, and that is, to what extent is diagnosis of multimorbid conditions within the remit of this call? So obviously we know that many conditions carry risk for cancer, also associated with other diseases. So would that be within the remit of the call?
I think I'd want to see a direct read through into cancer diagnosis being very clearly set out there. So to take a case in point, the association between recent onset type 1 diabetes with weight loss or without weight gain is an area which we recognize as being associated with the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. But you would want to see the read through and not the simple diagnosis of diabetes. Great,
thank you. Question perhaps here for the office is that quite a specific question, that there's a technology that is CE marked for collection and harvesting of cells in a liquid biopsy context, but not CE marked for specific clinical use. Would that be eligible?
So again, I think probably that's cutting a fine line, because we would like the regulatory approvals to be in place for the specific use, and the evidence you will come forward with, if you have demonstrated that there is effectiveness in your approach, will have to be related to the use case you present. So it will depend on that. Probably something to look into in more detail for the specific case, but could be a risk of non-eligibility.
Okay, thank you. So some of these questions that I've been looking through relate to some extent to the application and assessment process that Ji will take us through in a moment, but I think it's worth discussing them live as well. So one of those is, do we have a predefined metric for measuring improvement in cancer diagnosis?
That's a very, I think, if we had that in general, that would be great. I think it will, again, depend on the use case you're gonna present. But probably, you know, there are national data that are published, and you can refer to those as a benchmark and baseline. And I'm sure that the colleagues from NHS England or Peter will be happy to chip in if there is anything that wants to be suggested on that.
Yeah, I guess there are a number of domains in which you could define improvement in this context. One would be the increased likelihood of detection at an early stage. One would be a more rapid diagnostic pathway. One would be a better use of resources in the diagnostic pathway to create efficiency and productivity. So the improvement could be in a number of domains, but all of them would be potentially encompassed in this.
Okay, thank you.
And if I can add something, just to point out, as a good point, in the application form, we will publish it online shortly. There is actually a question on the sort of numbers and metrics that you should be considering based on the sort of effect you think you're going to have in the system. So that should help to guide you to answer properly and provide us with some values that we can then analyze. So there will be some prompts in the application form to give you an idea of the sort of things we will be looking at.
Great, thank you. Interesting question, I think, both for programme and NHS colleagues, and that is, does the innovation need to have a clear application within a current pathway? So, for example, replacing standards of care or providing an additive test, or is it possible to use the programme to explore roles for different steps in the pathway? So rather than modifying or adding to a current pathway, actually considering perhaps even reinventing the pathway, I would imagine, with a new innovation.
It sounds attractive, and certainly if it's a way of diagnosing cancer more rapidly and efficiently, fantastic. What you'd need to be able to demonstrate for this particular call is that it's applicable now and that there's sufficient evidence base to be doing it. And in general terms, starting a completely new pathway may struggle to have the evidence base that we would expect. But nonetheless, certainly I would not rule it out. And an entirely different way of making a diagnosis, if it's more efficient and equally accurate, would be very attractive.
Great, thank you. Anything else from you, Katrina, or is that?
No, I mean, I could totally, agree.
Okay, very specific question. Are innovations that measure breast density as part of risk-based screening eligible?
Peter, do you want to have a go?
I don't think I can comment on that. The point is that they would need to improve the efficiency of diagnosis of presumably breast cancer. So simply something which measures breast density more effectively, not, but something which allows us to detect more cancers at an early stage, yes.
Great, thank you. And then would innovations to expand genetic testing to identify those at higher risk of developing cancer and therefore increasing screening of those persons be of interest to the programme? So it gets triaging for screening based on genetic testing.
I think that's a slightly more difficult one. I think if there was a sufficient evidence base to demonstrate that you could do targeted screening in a particular population, then identifying that population would be potentially eligible. But bear in mind that you would need an evidence base that was definitely the case for this particular proposal.
Great, thank you. And then interesting question about sort of devolved nations. So if sites already use the innovation, are in the NHS but not in England, would this still mean it's eligible? I'm sure that's the case because we're
I was going to
from across the
answer.
world. So.
The point is, yes, what we want to make sure is that the innovation is doesn't require any further development. So this would be sufficient to demonstrate that it is commercially available and is mature enough to be already in use somewhere else. But then when you apply, the tests will have to be made in England.
Okay, perfect. A number of the questions are being answered by text. We've got a few questions relating to GP, so improving the quality of referral, I guess, for cancer from general practice into secondary tertiary care. Would they be eligible?
Theoretically, yes, if they improve the efficiency of conversion from referral to diagnosis, for example. This is clearly a very crowded area. There are a lot of systems out there at the moment in decision support, and so I think you'd need to be conscious that you would need the evidence base to show that this already had a use case demonstrable.
Okay, thank you. Again, some more specific questions relating to assessment process. One here is it possible to use evidence generated from other countries, say in Asia or mainland Europe, or would the evidence have to be UK based?
No, the answer is yes, that's acceptable. Obviously, the point is how to make a case of how what you demonstrate somewhere else can be translated in the UK. Okay,
thank you. Very clear. And then another question, is it mandatory to work with the company that developed the diagnostic? Or if it's already in use in a few sites, would implementation into routine care be eligible as an application project?
So again, there is, I guess, not a straight answer to that. In principle, it's advisable that you work with the company because they will have to provide the product. So they will still be a subcontractor in your application process because you will have to purchase it as part of the use case you will describe. So in terms of also intellectual property discussions, it would be good, advisable to engage with them, even if this is commercially available. An initiative comes from an hospital, for example, to apply.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Well, that pretty much takes us, we've tried to go through a number of the questions. One question for the office, for Katrina, I guess the questions that are still on the chat, we'll be able to answer those. Perfect. Okay, so we will capture answers for all of those questions, but we've gone through most of them. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Shizi, who's going to take us through basically the application and review process.
It's taken me a while to get myself unmuted. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Z, one of the senior program managers looking after the competition. So today I will provide a quick introduction into the application and assessment process, and also some high-level guidance on navigating through the online application portal. I appreciate some elements could be difficult to visualize right now, but please don't worry and hesitate to contact the Program Management Office after the webinar if you encounter any issues. So as mentioned earlier by Katerina, the application portal will open on the 5th of April and will open for 7 weeks, closing on the 24th of May. So all submitted applications will be reviewed and the most promising proposals will be shortlisted for further assessment. So what's going to happen is the shortlisting meeting will take place about 5 weeks after we have closed the portal for applications, and you'll be notified of the outcome, whether or not you have been shortlisted. So if shortlisted, you will be invited to attend an interview with our panel of experts in September, and the date of which will be confirmed in the shortlisting outcome. So the shortlisted applications will be subjected to a series of external peer review and an impact analysis and evaluation by the NHS England's team. And you will be provided with all of these comments prior to your interview. There will be no written rebuttal to peer review and impact comments, but instead, what you're encouraged to do, if invited to the interview, is to address these the key comments and questions from peer reviewers at the interview itself. And if successful, the program management team will conduct a series of due diligence with the successful team and organization before contracting. Next, please. The application will be shortlisted based on 8 criteria as shown here. Please note the focus has actually changed slightly since the first competition, and the applicants are encouraged to really consider all of the questions and available guidance when completing the form itself. The application will be really scored on its potential impact on early cancer diagnosis, evidence accumulated to date, the quality of the project plan, strength of the innovation and its unique selling points and IP management, implementation and adoption, EDI and net zero, strength of the team, and also the justification of project costs. So all of this information will be made available online as well in March, certainly before we launch the competition. So there's no need to really copy this down, as we will make all of this information available to you. Next, please. So I will now spend a few minutes on the application portal itself, which will look something like this on your screen. If you have an account with us already, then that's simple. You can just log in, but otherwise you will need to register for a new account with us. Next, please. Please make sure that all your account's detail is up to date using the Manage My Detail function on the left-hand side of the screen. And this will be used to actually auto-populate part of the application form. So it's actually crucial that you keep all of the information accurate. When you are ready, you can start a new grant application on the home page. Next, please. There will be, well, there may be a number of other funding competitions that are running at the same time. So for this particular one, please select the NHS Cancer Programme, which will be clearly labelled, and you can even cross-check that with the opening and close date as well, just to make sure you have the correct one. Next, please. On the application itself, there will be a number of question marks throughout the different sections to help guide you provide the most appropriate information. In addition to that, please also refer to the guidance for applicants that we publish online, and that will provide you with the most comprehensive description of what needs to be considered and included in the relevant sections. You don't need to complete the form in one go, and actually can save and revisit the application at any time as well. Next, please. Please note all sections will need to be completed before your form can be submitted. So one particular section that would really benefit from advanced planning is the team and subcontractor section. So team members, clinical partners, and subcontractors that you may wish to include must have an account on our system before you can invite them to participate in the application. If you click Add Contact and they have an account, you should be able to search for the name directly. But please note that there is a limit of up to 50 people in the application. So if you're involving multiple organizations, it is encouraged that you have at least one named person from each of those. Next, please. After you have completed the form, or you think you have completed the form, you will notice that the Submit button isn't actually available straight away. This is because the people you invited will need to confirm their participation in the project. This is one of the key reasons why we encourage people to start the process as early as they can and leave plenty of time to complete the form, as it can actually take some time to ensure all partners have an account and they have confirmed their participation. Next, please. So how do they confirm? So they will need to log into their own account and go to My Co-application section on the left-hand side. Click on the icon at the end of the application. Next, please. And this will take them to the page where they can confirm their participation in the project. Next, please. So after all invited partners have confirmed their participation, you can then submit the application form itself. And before you do that, and if it's not showing up, you should be able to see on the summary page who has confirmed the participation and who hasn't. Next, please. So I appreciate that it's a lot of information on a system that you're not very familiar with. But as mentioned before, you can get in touch with the Program Management Office team at any time using the information provided here. And all of this contact detail is also available on the competition website. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm delighted now to introduce 3 speakers who are going to take us through their experience, both initially as an awardee. That's Mr. Ajit George, who's a head and neck consultant and medical director for Endoscope Eye. That was a recent recipient of one of our awards. And then Joanne Mewis, who's representing the West Midlands AHSN, and then finally Mark Dean from the Cancer Alliance at West Yorkshire and Harrogate. So Ajit, I'm delighted you could join us. I hope you're with us because you've been on call. Are you with us now?
I am, yes.
Great, welcome. Nice to see you.
That's all right. So thanks everyone. Thanks for the invite. I'm Addis George. I'm a head and neck surgeon from the Midlands, Stoke-on-Trent, and G, who's our program manager, asked us to give you all a little bit of a rundown on experiences really with the application process and how we went about things. So hopefully I should get my first slide up. Yep, so if you just go to the next one, thank you. So for us, we were interested in looking at head and neck cancer, and most of our detection is about endoscopy. So here you can see me performing what we call a nase endoscopy. It's where the camera goes in through the nose, down into the throat to see, you can see a little lesion there, the green arrow is pointing to. And there's absolutely no way in which a GP can diagnose these kind of things. And unfortunately, from the primary care point of view, this could present with something very common, like a feeling of a lump in the throat or a cough or a change in the voice, something that we've all experienced. So it's really hard for primary care to exclude cancers. So the only pathway they've got is to send it into the 2-week wait system. And that has been getting backlogged, as we know. The other side of things is that this endoscopy equipment you can see in the background is very specialized, it's very expensive, and it's only exclusively reserved for hospitals. So if you go to the next slide, please. We were awarded our grant on the basis of creating a mobile endoscopy camera system. It was based on using an iPhone, securing that, encrypting all the data, and using a series of apps that would allow us to capture these kind of images in primary care and be able to send that over into secondary care, so someone like myself could provide an instant diagnosis. If you go to the next slide, please. So in terms of our background, we were in the process of collating this evidence. We already had this system established in our trust after a successful pilot. And what we were looking for was real world implementation. So we'd kind of done the safe thing by using the service in a safe environment with someone who knew how all of the technology worked. And we were really interested in using some of the funding from the SBRI to push that into a real world setting and see what it would be like to take this new pathway that we've created into a completely native system and see if we could do everything from the IT, from the governance and the clinical pathway and see how that would work. But the key thing was that we had this really good sound data from our pilot to help us get us going. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what happens with a telescopic referral is the nurse does the examination. That could be in primary care, wherever. That video is sent over to someone like myself as a consultant. I'll make a diagnosis, write a report. I do that on an iPad. And then the report is sent to the patient via a text message. So within 24 to 48 hours, they get their results straight away. If you go to the next slide, please. We took a classic process of a consultation that was exclusively in hospital and basically changed that completely by having a nurse performing the endoscopy, taking a quick history, sending that off as a video. And for myself as a consultant, I can now sit at home or sit wherever I am when I have a few minutes and run through these referrals. So what I now do is, you can see on the right side, there's my iPad. These are the videos that I get. It's got some patient demographics, some information about their history. You can see a tiny little lesion there on the vocal cord. And I can use the technology in the app we've created to snapshot certain areas of that examination. So it records at 60 frames per second. And I can take the key images that I need in order to generate a report. Once I've got 4 images, then I can send that off as a final report. So go to the next slide, please. So that's our technology. This is a little bit about our story. We were informed of this quite late on really in the process. So you're already one step ahead by being here on this call. Our hospital informed us about this cancer call on the 14th of April. You can see there the key dates for submission was the 21st of April. So we had a very short time frame. I certainly wouldn't want to replicate that and advise you as much as possible to get going with the application as early as you can do, but we certainly had to consolidate our efforts. So you go to the next slide, please. So the key thing was, did we meet the brief? And I think today's been very much about what that brief is. There are two key points here. Did we streamline the cancer diagnosis process? Well, we feel that we did do. And do we improve early detection? Well, we're enhancing the early use of endoscopy and widening the number of patients to get access to endoscopy. So we felt that we had two ticks in that box, and that's why we then went on to start filling out the form. So go to the next slide, please. So it was for us, it was a very hectic 7 days. Fortunately for you all on this call, it won't be quite so packed in. I don't think there was much sleep. The first thing I did was assemble my team. We have quite a small team, but made them all aware of what we were about to do, what the brief of the project was, and always stick to the brief with it. And it also allowed me to delegate some of the tasks, particularly when you go through the form. You'll see there's quite a few sections, and you can actually delegate them to whoever's an expert in your team to deal with those questions. The earliest thing we did was turn to the Cancer Alliance, so ours was the West Midlands. We fortunately had links with them already because they sponsored our initial pilots. So we contacted them again, told them about this, and they were obviously already registered on the management system. So it was an awareness that we were applying for this money. Us ourselves had to register on the grant tracker. It's important to do that early on because it does take a few days for your registration to go through. And importantly, your clinical partners, so maybe if you're doing what we did, which is where you're replicating your project in another trust, your clinical partners also need to register onto the system, and that can take some time. So do that quite early on. Similar with your subcontractors as well. We've got a couple of subcontractors from our sides with IT, so had to make sure that all of their quotes, everything was all ready within that short time frame. And again, if they needed to be, we're all registered onto the site. Familiarize yourself with the application form. What I did was basically took all the questions, put them into a Word document and worked on that offline. And just basically, I didn't work on the form online live, just in case I lost any details. It also allowed me a bit with the word checking, the spell checking, grammar, punctuation, etc. I found that a really good way, and we had a live document that we were working on the cloud, so all the team could access it, edit it, the sort of things that we do these days for joint document submission. Familiarize yourself with the Gantt charts, get a good template for that. I got quite a nice one from Excel. It's a good way of just planning out what your whole project's going to look like over the 18-month period, work out the working time equivalent salaries for all of the people taking part in the project, and have some really good data and some good statistics. We were very fortunate because we were on the verge of having our peer-reviewed paper published. So, but that was, I think, probably key to us getting through to the first stage, just having some really solid data. And I'll kind of talk to you about some of the examples of that. Know about your IP, both your existing and your forward IP, because that will certainly be in your application form and moving forward into due diligence later on if you're successful. And then the patient and public involvement and engagement is very key. We spoke to our head and neck cancer charity. We had some ongoing surveys going on with patients who have used our service, and the university was very good. So our local university was Keele. Fortunately, I'm a lecturer there, so I had some links in. So think about that very early, because I think there's quite high scoring for their involvement, and rightly so. Then you want to think about how you're going to disseminate your information. Conferences, publications, peer review. You can set aside some money for that to make sure all of that's accounted for. I know your device regulations. There's a bit of a change now with medical device regulations, with us moving out from the EU. So just familiarize yourself with them. At the minute, there's no real changes until 2023 with those, but make sure you've got everything in place. And then we, because we had that short time frame, I arranged a call with Xi, and it was really just to kind of go over, I think, everything what you've talked about today, but just to consolidate that we were at the right point. So it was quite useful for us to meet Xi. It just happened to be that Xi was our manager afterwards when we were successful. Next slide, please. So I think the key thing here is just make sure you've got a lead. I took the lead in this project because I knew the pilot study well, and I was working in my trust at the time that had all of the data. So I had a good overarching view of the whole project. but I could not have done this without delegating key tasks such as the governance, the IP, business plan I put out to other members of the team and then brought it all together in the application form. Next slide, please. So if you're successful with your application, as you said, you'll be notified by a letter. It's a very nice letter to have. You then go through a peer review process. So like-minded colleagues, I imagine, who would look at your application form, raise any questions. That was a really useful part of the process, actually, to get someone looking from the outside, really picking out all of the problems. And you have to then answer those when you go to your next stage, which is the interview. You also get an impact analysis, so you start getting some numbers, some real meat on the bones. It's a provisional thing, but it really gives you an idea of whether or not your project is worthy of this call. And then when it comes to the presentation, I think you want a really clear and succinct presentation, something that's very easy to follow. I think you've got to bear in mind that your audience might not necessarily have the expertise that you will. At the same time, there is some expertise in there as scientists, so not too basic, but then not too advanced. You've just got to cut it right, use your data well. So if you go to the next slide, I've just got an example of just how the data would work. So our whole process was about improving the 2-week wait pathway for head and neck cancer. And unfortunately for us, COVID had a major impact on that. It's because we weren't allowed to endoscope patients because of the aerosol generating risk. So it really slowed down things for head and neck. We had to therefore pick out only high-risk patients, and the low-risk patients were, in some cases, being told come back later on or deferred down the line, which in our hospital we were a bit uncomfortable about, and this was the outcome of it. So these are waiting times for low-risk patients at the beginning of the pandemic from July to October. You can see at the bottom is the number of patients, and on the y-axis is the number of days they've had to wait for their first 2-week wait appointment. Now, bear in mind, they really should be diagnosed within 28 days, which is the green tab. 62 is an absolute cutoff, which is they should be treated in 62, but certainly they shouldn't be going over that into the red. And you can see our waiting times were awful. So if you go to just click on the next one, thanks. So we introduced the telescopic referral pathway at a time where we had a huge backlog and things were looking pretty bleak. And that's one of the reasons why I think the trust decided to do something about it. So our lowest patients went through this brand new system, and it had an immediate impact. From November to December, just within a couple of months, we started to get rid of those patients waiting over 100 days. And then by January, if you go to the next slide, we started to see those waiting times go right down. So we started to hit the faster diagnostic standard just within a few months of the new technology. So it's just a demonstration there of some visuals and some data that you can use to really prove your point. Next slide, please. On the other side of things, this flow chart here is a little bit complex, but on the left-hand side, what you've got is the standard of care. And on the right side is our new pathway. And if you just look at the box there on the left side, it has something called cancer conversion rate. You can see the cancer conversion rate on the old pathway there is 5%. And I just want you to turn to the right side where you see the cancer conversion rate of 17%. And I think just something as basic as those two figures showing how the introduction of this new pathway enables us to really pick out the patients who have cancer and get them through consultant clinics much quicker. And the low-risk patients who necessarily don't have cancer are still seen and still get our opinion, but they're not clogging up the system. So just some use of data there. Go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned about patient and public involvement. We used our head and neck cancer charity. We had some surveys from patients, but it's an absolute key thing, I think, in the whole process. And then next slide, please. Once you're successful, hopefully from your presentation, you go through the final process, you get another nice letter saying that you were successful. It's not quite done and dusted yet. There's a period of due diligence where you really just consolidate the whole process. Make sure all of your subcontractors, clinical partners are engaged in this, because there'll be bits of information that you'll need to clarify. You may be asked to perhaps enhance on something more. So for us, we had to go a little bit more on the nurse training side of things. So we had to rejig some of our figures for that. Again, we used the live document process for this. So we created a document with all the questions that came back from the presentation, and our team worked on those live, and then we fed that back to G. I think it was a really nice way of doing that. So final slide, what I'd say is, in summary, make sure you meet the brief, and the brief, I think, is pretty clear in this call, which is quite nice. Make sure you've got someone who's a good all-rounder to lead on your project, but delegate the tasks of the application well. Don't do what we did, which is find out 7 days in advance. You've got plenty of time. Start working on it now and get those tasks delegated. Get some really good solid data that's very clear and that will visually look good in your presentation. Practice your presentation so you're nice and clear as to what you're proposing. Use your project manager for advice. We had a lot of Teams calls with G just to make sure we're on the right track, doing all the things that we're supposed to do. And I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Ajit. A very clear presentation. I hope that was helpful to everyone listening. I'm going to pass over now to Joanne Mewes, who's here representing the West Midlands AHSN. Joanne, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And I've got to say well done to Ajit. That was an excellent presentation with lots of tips for everyone. But I am mindful of the time, so I'm literally here to give you sort of an overview of the West Midlands AHSN. I'm going to speak briefly about our journey with Endoscope Eye to date. And then I'll quickly run over the AHSN network for you, so you understand what we're here to do and how we might be able to assist you. So next slide, please. So the West Midlands AHSN footprint is large. It's about 13,000 square kilometres. That's about 5,000 square miles. And we're a really geographically diverse region. As you'd expect, we've got sort of intensely urbanised areas such as Birmingham, Coventry, Wolverhampton, but we've also got very rural counties with Shropshire and Herefordshire. And of course, that in turn creates its own sort of challenges. We have 6 integrated care systems on our patch, and we also have one of the largest scale 5G test beds. So it really means that there's a real catalyst here in the West Midlands for the accelerated testing of digital and data-driven healthcare products. Now, all of the 15 AHSNs, we work together to deliver our national programmes of work, but we each have our own priority areas. You can see ours there on the screen. And those really reflect the diversity of our local populations and also of our local healthcare system challenges. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased to say, actually, the team at the AHSN have been working with the team at Endoscope Eye now for over 4 years, originally starting with their Endoscope Eye technology in ENT telemedicine. That we helped assist with a fully funded pilot with GPs in Staffordshire that ran over 6 months. And the results of that have actually been peer-reviewed and published in March 2020. And also a case study from one of our practices in Newcastle-under-Lyme was published in GP Online. So we can really help with that dissemination piece. During COVID-19, the team at Endoscope Eye, very innovative, they were researching how they could continue to perform endoscopy procedures. So they worked with the West Midlands AHSN's mid-tech service to sort of secure their IP, and then started work on their Snap EI product, which is a resealable port in surgical masks. So you can give access for endoscopes through PPE masks with patients. And that was recognised by the West Midlands AHSN, and they actually won one of our Meridian Awards in 2021. So moving forward, we're going to look to support this new telescopic solution. And to date, that's shown, as I just said, really significant reductions in waiting times, increase in the cancer diagnosis, and we'll be supporting that via our networks, our innovation exchange, as well as working alongside our fellow AHSNs, because we're looking to implement that solution in a real world setting. So our next slide, please. So now I'm going to give you a really sort of whistle-stop tour around the AHSN network and the services that we might be able to help you with. Next slide, please. So in its simplest form, the AHSN network is actually a network of networks. There are 15 of us operating across England as the key innovation arm to the NHS. Our purpose really is to transform lives through innovation, and we all share a vision for the NHS to be that global leader in uptaking and adopting innovation. And we do that by understanding the needs of our regional health and care system. Next slide, please. So we, in the simplest form, we act as catalysts for innovation, and we help to facilitate change across the whole health and social care system. And really we do this by connecting with our regional networks of NHS, academia, local authorities, third sector organisations, our industry partners, and most importantly, our citizens. So that helps us to be able to respond to the diverse needs of our patients and of our populations, and we do that through partnership and collaboration. Next slide, please. So I would say in that respect, we are actually truly unique. I think our strength lies in our ability to operate locally, and most importantly, because we have the trust of our stakeholders, our trusts, and our member organisations. So we look to really understand the needs of our health system, and we're sort of well placed really to impartially broker introducing innovative evidence solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've all signed up to a shared vision, and that's to be committed to spreading healthcare innovations at scale and pace, to improve the health outcomes of our populations, to drive down costs for the NHS, and of course to stimulate economic growth. Next slide, please. Okay, so to enable us to do this, we've all signed up to some key shared priorities that you can see here. Now, they include supporting adoption and spread, but also the transformation agenda. And again, as I said, sort of stimulating economic growth. And we all work together to achieve this. Next slide, please. Okay, so we each have an innovation exchange. And through our innovation exchanges, we actually are able to support businesses. And we can also then sort of support the regional import and export of different innovations. And we achieve this through sort of four main functions. The first being to work closely across our ICSs to identify and communicate their need and their challenges out to industry. We also work to support innovators with signposting and linking them into a range of activities and services that we can offer them. Obviously, we look to undertake evaluation in real world settings, and we look to reach out to partners for you. And we support the spread and adoption of those supported evidence innovations. Okay, so next slide, please. So really, I'd say that the AHSNs are actually innovation brokers. So we don't always deliver all the services and the support ourselves, but what we are able to do is to help you make connections and find the right help and assistance you need to move forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so to really enable a streamlined journey for businesses and innovators that we work with, and to enable you to be able to access your local AHSN, we've created the AHSN Network National Innovation Exchange, and that acts as a digital gateway for each of our regional innovation exchanges, and you'll be able to access that via the AHSN's National Network site. It also contains in there a directory for anybody, it details funding opportunities, partner organisations, as well as relevant news from across our network that's relevant for innovators and industry. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, really, in addition to sort of everything I've outlined and how we can support you, we also have our Bridging the Gap events. So we hold these events really to help you to better understand us and to engage with us. And these events actually happen at a national and a local level. And again, you'll be able to find out more about when they're being held on the AHSN Network's website. Alongside though our events, we also work with national programmes such as SBRI Healthcare, as we're here today, the Accelerated Access Collaborative, as well as the NHS Innovation Accelerator. Next slide, please. So really, in summary, I'd say that we use our local knowledge and we harness and we influence, our partners really to drive change on the ground. We're also, of course, really invested in seeing our healthcare businesses thrive and grow. So I would urge you to reach out to your local AHSN if you haven't already engaged with them, so that they know you, they know what you're trying to do, and we can help you along the way. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Joanne. So it's a pleasure to introduce our last speaker for this session. That's Mark Dean, who's Innovation Project Manager for Early Diagnosis in West Yorkshire and Harrogate. Thank you, Mark. We will have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, so please keep posing those questions in the Q&A box. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Richard. So we could go to the first slide, please. So yeah, today thank you. I'm just really going to talk about kind of rollout of projects and projects happening within the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Cancer Alliance to get a flavour of what's going on within the Alliance. So again, it just gives a brief overview here. So the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Cancer Alliance join forces with innovators to support the introduction of new technology. And again, it goes in line with the SBR IBID in terms of it's about improving early diagnosis and through diagnostic techniques and things like risk assessment. So we could go to the next slide, please. So I think it'd be rude of me not to mention a pinpoint that was successful in the last SBR IBID. So we are the key cancer alliance working with Pinpoint at the moment. So just to give an overview of Pinpoint itself, it's a blood test which uses artificial intelligence that can give a risk score in terms of patients who have cancer or may not have cancer from 0 to 1. So this again could take 20% of patients off the cancer pathway, so that's equivalent to around 500,000 people a year. It improves the patient experience. It reduces the amount of diagnostics that the patient has to go through as well, and could be a game changer in the future. So in terms of Pinpoint at the moment, it's being run across both primary care and secondary care across West Yorkshire and Harrogate at the moment, with the aim being to achieve 100 diagnoses per pathway. There's 9 pathways in order for the test to become live. So as well as this, we also work across other programs within both the local and national footprint. So as well as this, we have an innovation competition which has just closed and the winners have just been announced. So the winners within West Yorkshire and Harrogate worked on innovations such as MagSeed, which is in relation to breast surgery. There's frailty pilots, again in relation to cancer diagnosis, targeted screening, and there is a head and neck cancer innovation also. As well as this, we have a colon capsule endoscopy service running. So we work heavily with Medtronic, using CCE in patients with a FIT score of less than 10 to again use that as a replacement to endoscopy. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Again, this is looking at more national programs now. So as mentioned in the presentation earlier, we also work on Cytosponge. So that's again working with NHS England and Medtronic, delivering Cytosponge across Barrett's esophagus within a number of trusts within West Yorkshire and Harrogate. And as well as the local pilot, we also work nationally, again with colon capsule endoscopy. And I believe that is my final slide. I kept it quite brief because I realised I was tight for time. Hopefully that was brief enough.
That's perfect, Mark.
Time for Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mark. So that gives us 9 minutes for Q&A. So there are some questions still in the Q&A box, and I'm going to pose those to NHS colleagues, but also to Centre. I'm going to begin with the first question, which is relating to medical device regulation. And so an important point, medical device regulation requires clinical evidence, but the NHS is often reluctant to trial new technologies that are not CE marked as a minimum. So the question is, has there been any thoughts around how early stage companies can be supported by the NHS to overcome that initial clinical proof of concept barrier? in particularly UK-based businesses that could have a significant impact on the NHS and UK PLC. So I'll hand that off to the office to answer.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And then everyone else, feel free to chip in, especially from the NHS England team, if you have anything to add. What I wanted to flag is that maybe not specific to this program, but there are another number of more early stage programs that can be supportive of this. You can apply for funding to undertake these activities and run these studies with an NHS partner. And if you're looking into, I appreciate it's not the solution to everything and they are quite competitive, but you could refer to the NIHR Invention for Innovation program, for example, that allows you to undertake activities around regulatory approvals and studies for CE marking, or the SBRI, the standard SBRI healthcare program. Obviously, this is clinical need focused. So if there is not a colon cancer, is not the right one, but NIHR I4I could be a way to go to solve this problem, and that accepts applications from small UK businesses. So that's what I would suggest.
Great, thank you, Katrina. Any comments from the NHS side? No?
I was going. I don't know if I'm on screen. I was trying to unmute on
We
video.
can see you, Kristen. Yeah, we can see you. Hi there.
Perfect. I was just going to add to that the CE marking is obviously a requirement for this competition, but we do provide funding to Cancer Alliances to support with local innovation, smaller pilots. And so it's, again, limited to what the Cancer Alliances are doing, but it's worth exploring the option as to whether they would use their local innovation funding for smaller pilots to enable you to build the evidence that's required to then go on for CE marking. So just to add to what Katerina said, there are other funding routes available.
Great, thank you very much. A question sort of relating to information requests, and that is, has any needs definition been completed in the area of pathology that could be shared? Katerina or anyone from the office, any answer to that?
So in terms of the specific needs, there is nothing that we have published so far, but probably we could take this offline and see if there is anything that, if the anonymous attendee is happy to provide the details, we would be happy to share any documentation that could be available and maybe expand on the question. That would be
great.
good.
Thank you, Katerina. That's helpful. Quite a difficult question to answer, but an important one, and that is, how does cancer prevention factor in NHS Cancer Plan ambitions? Obviously, these wins are somewhat more invisible, so presumably the Cancer Plan also is interested in promotion of interventions such as chemoprophylaxis, etc., that will improve cancer prevention, as well as early detection and improved stage shift. So I guess a question about emphasis on cancer prevention approaches.
So I'll try and answer this one. So cancer prevention is obviously very important, and I think if we think about this specific call is on early diagnosis and increasing those stage 1 and stage 2 cancers overall, you could make the argument that you could either do that by increasing the numbers of cancers diagnosed at stage 1 and stage 2, or decreasing the number of cancers diagnosed overall, so increasing the proportion. It's a bit of a leap. So for this call, we do want to see evidence of improvement in early diagnosis. So if you can find a way to make that case, you could give it a try. But as I said, it's a bit of a stretch.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. That's helpful. I don't know if Ajit's still with us. Are you still with us, Ajit?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So there's a question for you, and that is, if you had to pick the one task, what is the one thing you wish you'd done earlier in your application process?
As the clinical partners, definitely. Chasing them round to get registered on the system was probably one of the hardest tasks. Everyone's got lots of things to do, and I think this came, unfortunately, down in other people's priority lists, even though it was quite high on mine. So I think, just to reiterate the point, to get your clinical partners engaged in this process and make sure they're registered, because it does take time for that registration to go through. And it's the one thing that you have no control of when the application process comes, because everything else you can do, but if they're not registered on that system, you're absolutely stuck. So definitely do that.
Great, thank you very much. Very clear.
And
Okay, so
Richard, just one
yes.
thing, I wanted to chip in to say something. That's a very good point. What I wanted to say to the attendees is that even if the application is still not open for submissions, you can already start registering on the system. So you can start thinking ahead if you want.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. We've got 3 minutes left. So it just remains for me to thank all the speakers today. First of all, for all of you for attending and your questions, they were fantastic. Actually, there's one more question because we've got a minute, which is last time we got an approval to bid as the lead, I was told that we were considered to be EU. I don't know if there's a question in that, but
I think this is a follow-on question on something that was answered in the Q&A by one of the program managers' office. So we will follow up offline.
Perfect. Thank you, Katerina. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been a great session. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you to Gillian, Katerina, Peter, G, Ajit, Joanna, and Mark for their great insights, which has been really interesting, really helpful to hear, both from the office, but also from those people who've gone through the process. So thanks for joining us. Please feel free to send more questions in, and don't forget to join that innovation matchmaking event on the 25th of March. And we look forward to receiving applications from you. So thank you so much for joining us.